She says, hi. I thought, oh, wow. I said, wow, hi. She says, hi, Michael.
They say Gene died in his sleep, but some sleeps are arranged so that no one ever wakes up. That line spoken by Al Pacino at the quiet funeral in Santa Fe left all of Hollywood frozen in silence. At 85, the man who had witnessed half a century of cinema's golden age finally broke his silence to reveal the truth about the death of his old friend Gene Hackman. For years, people believed Hackman had simply stepped away to find peace beyond the spotlight. But Pacino told a different story. He hinted that Hackman carried a secret far too great one, powerful enough to make anyone who mentioned it disappear. Hidden deals between power and fame films washed clean with money, and people forced into eternal silence for daring to tell the truth. That ordinary death-locked house clocks all stopped at the same hour. Fortune vanished without a trace, no longer looked like coincidence. And Pacino, his voice trembling yet firm, said, "They wiped every trace of Gene, but they forgot one thing I still remember." Let's turn back time to the final years of Gene Hackman so that for the first time, we can see the truth Hollywood has tried to hide for 2 decades. 1. Gene always said if you dare to stand against Hollywood, they won't need to kill you. They'll just make the world forget you ever existed. That was the line Al Pacino chose to open his story about Gene Hackman, the veteran actor who vanished from the spotlight so suddenly and quietly. To most, his disappearance seemed like a personal choice. To Pacino, it was orchestrated, and the most frightening part was how silently it all happened. According to Pacino, it began around 2001 when Hackman was offered the lead role in a major project produced by Harold Connery, a prominent name in the business known not only for his vast studio connections, but also for questionable private fund money flowing in from overseas. The film was promoted as an epic about compassion and justice, yet Hackman quickly sensed something wrong in its financial structure. Years of acting had sharpened his instincts. He could tell when art was just a cover. At a private meeting in Beverly Hills, Connery presented a contract and a massive paycheck. Hackman skimmed a few pages and stopped. He refused. To him, there was no reason to take a role that only polished a financial scheme disguised as cinema. From that moment, a chain of quiet events began, not a scandal, but something heavier than any scandal ever revealed. Within 3 months, Hackman's career froze. Negotiations halted without explanation. Studios turned away. The press stopped mentioning him not with bad news, but with complete silence. No more scripts, no more invitations, no more calls. The career of one of America's greatest faces on screen fell into a nameless void. Pacino remembered a summer afternoon in 2004 when he met Hackman at the Sunset Tower Hotel in West Hollywood. Though the weather was hot, Hackman wore a scarf around his neck. As he bent to pour tea, Pacino noticed a thin, sharp scar running from his neck to his shoulder. Hackman smiled, saying he had fallen while fixing a ceiling fan. But to Pacino, the cut looked too clean, too deep, and too carefully treated to be an accident. A silent wound, just like the silent things surrounding Hackman then. Not long after that meeting, Hackman announced his retirement. He sold his Beverly Hills home and moved to Santa Fe, a small desert town in New Mexico. There he lived almost entirely secluded. No staff, no public contacts, no interviews. Neighbors only knew him as an old bearded man who quietly visited a small bookstore every Friday afternoon. Clara, an employee there, said Hackman always bought the same kind of notebook, a large black moleskin. He paid in cash, never used a card. Once, when she jokingly asked if he was writing a detective novel, Hackman paused and said, "Some things shouldn't be printed." After that, he stayed away for nearly 3 months. Pacino claimed Hackman spent most of his time in Santa Fe writing not scripts, not novels, but memoirs. a book never meant to be published while he lived a record of what he had seen, known, and kept silent about for too long. According to Pacino, Hackman said that if he ever died, that book would speak for him. After Hackman's death, police found his personal computer in the study, but the hard drive was gone. His cloud backups, protected by two-factor authentication, had been permanently erased one day after the house was sealed. No signs of outside hacking. The system showed no strange access. It was clear someone had entered the house, taken what they wanted, and left without a trace. Pacino never shared details publicly, but confirmed he had read the first draft of that memoir at the end of 2023. In it, Hackman described shadowy links between finance and filmmaking, naming certain famous stars who allegedly used money to bury scandals, silence victims, and cover organized wrongdoing. The book ended with one short line: "If I tell it all, some people will lose everything." One detail haunted Pacino's Zena. The dog Hackman treated like family was found dead from suffocation inside a closet. Police claimed it had crawled in and got trapped, but Pacino disagreed. Zena never left Gene's side. She was trained to stay near him. If she was locked in, someone locked her there. The only reason to do that, he said, was to keep the dog from barking when a stranger entered. Forensics showed the removed hard drive bore no scratches. Whoever did it knew the device's exact structure. The back door hinges had been unscrewed with precision tools, and scratch marks on the closet matched the estimated time of both Zena's and Hackman's deaths, meaning he was still alive when it all happened. As the details emerged, Hackman's death no longer looked simple. It became a warning in Hollywood: silence can save your life, but truth can become a death sentence. Pacino said Hackman had seen what Hollywood never wanted exposed. He knew who stood behind the dark funds. He knew who used money to hide guilt. He knew too much, so much they couldn't let him write it down. Before they buried him, they buried his manuscript first. When asked if Pacino believed Gene Hackman's death was natural, he looked down at the table and said quietly, "Nothing natural is ever that clean." 2. No death is ordinary when someone dies right after they decide to tell the truth. That line, spoken by Al Pacino during an interview after the funeral, froze the entire room. He stared straight into the camera, unblinking. And Gene, he was ready to speak. March 2025, Santa Fe dry and cold. A maintenance worker named Luis Chavez arrived to check the electrical system at Gene Hackman's hilltop home on Cerro Gordo. He knocked, no answer. Lights were still on the alarm light, blinking as if manually disabled. Chavez circled to the back, called through a window, still silence. He contacted the neighborhood guard, and then the police were dispatched. When the door opened, a metallic, medicinal scent filled the air. The scene inside stunned everyone. Hackman lay on his back in the hallway, hand still clutching a fallen glass of water. His wife Betsy was found in the bathroom, a prescription bottle uncapped on the floor, water still dripping from the shower. One small dog dead in the closet, two others alive but trembling, their fur soaked as if freshly washed. The preliminary report read no signs of struggle, no forced entry, valuables intact. Santa Fe police concluded natural causes of old age. The next morning, every major paper ran the same headline: Gene Hackman passes peacefully beside his wife at 95. But those who truly knew Gene understood nothing in his life had ever been peaceful. By that afternoon, strange details surfaced. Every clock in the house had stopped at 3:17 a.m., not from a power outage, since lights and heating still worked. The DVR from the security cameras was gone, yet the cables were untouched, neatly unplugged. The back door was slightly ajar, its hinges loosened with a screwdriver. A neighbor, Greta Lewis, testified that around 3 a.m., she heard a car engine saw headlights sweep across her fence, then fade down the hill. Police omitted this from their official report. 2 days later, a forensic technician added another anomaly. Hackman's fingerprints didn't match the ones on the glass he was holding. The surface had been wiped with a thin oil layer beforehand. His body temperature and estimated time of death didn't align with Betsy's. She had died at least a week earlier. Yet her body was preserved in a steady environment, as if someone had kept the climate control running. Police called it coincidence, but a private examination commissioned by Pacino said otherwise. The computer keyboard showed oily prints from a third person, neither Jean nor Betsy. Pacino read the report in silence. When a journalist asked what he thought, he replied, "Someone entered that house and they knew exactly what they were looking for." Friends said that weeks before his death, Hackman complained about strange noises at night and a light outside the window that never went off. He even sent Pacino a voice message, trembling, "Bob, if anything happens. Remember, I never open the door at night." That message was sent at 3:02 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before every clock in the house stopped. From there, everything seemed perfectly staged: a spotless scene, intact locks, and a dry official report of natural death. Yet among those fragments, something didn't fit. An unseen hand had arranged, wiped, and framed the story in the same way Hollywood always does with its secrets. Pacino concluded in the interview, they didn't just take Jean's life, they took the story he wanted to tell. And that was only the beginning of a darker trail clues that could turn that so-called natural death into one of the coldest mysteries Hollywood ever tried to bury. 3. I've seen many quiet deaths in my life, but none as spotless as this. That was the first sentence from the Santa Fe officer who was directly at Gene Hackman's home. He spoke in an anonymous interview, his voice trembling as if still haunted by what he called a frightening orderliness. Weeks after Hackman's passing, a forensic report was leaked. No one took responsibility for the disclosure, but a copy spread through internal media circles within hours. The dry lines in that document stripped away the normalcy the police had announced to the public. According to the file, Betsy, his wife, had actually died 7 days before Hackman. Time of death was determined by body temperature and tissue decomposition differing by at least 160 hours. But the detail that chilled everyone was the cause: hantavirus exposure, a rare agent transmitted by rodents. Yet there were no signs of rodents in Hackman's house. No droppings, no gnaw marks, no trace of the virus in food, water, or on the floors. Everything was spotless to an unreal degree. And then another detail on Betsy's wrist was a microneedle mark visible only under a microscope. This type of needle isn't sold widely. It's used only in high-level medical laboratories. That needle mark was what led a young forensic specialist to leave the field just 2 months after completing the report. Some said she couldn't handle the job pressure. Her former colleagues told a different story. She knew she had touched something she was never meant to see. The data on Hackman in the report was even stranger. The cause of death was listed as acute heart failure, but every external sign contradicted that conclusion. His body was clean hair, freshly cut nails, neatly trimmed clothes folded on a chair as if arranged in advance for whoever would come to tidy up. No sweat, no signs of a struggle, no indications of a sudden heart episode. The kitchen refrigerator still held fresh food, milk, not yet expired, canned goods recently opened. The water bowls for the 2 surviving dogs had been changed daily. The food was still slightly warm, and the mail had been gathered neatly. All of it suggested that someone had been coming and going for days after Betsy died, and before Jean stopped breathing. Pacino received a copy of that report from an old friend in investigations. He read all night, then called a trusted journalist. The first thing he said was Jean's death wasn't just a heart attack, it was staged. In Hackman's hand, police found a folded slip of paper with just 2 words, "No more lies." The ink matched the Mont Blanc pens he usually used. The paper had been torn from a moleskin notebook, the same kind he bought at the local bookstore. But the facing page in that notebook, the other half of the sheet, had been torn out. Some believed he wrote it in panic, but handwriting analysis showed an even steady line with no shaking or breaks, meaning he was calm when he wrote that final line. Pacino looked at that slip in the officer's hands and murmured, "That's not a farewell. That's a declaration." 3 weeks before Hackman died, he called Pacino. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. Pacino still keeps the recording on his phone, what he later called the call that made my spine go cold. Hackman's voice was husky, trembling, almost a whisper. "Bob, if I go first, don't let them rewrite my story." Pacino asked, "Who were they?" Gene silenced for a few seconds. Then Hackman spoke slowly, each word clear. "The ones who once paid for my silence." Immediately after came 3 hard knocks at the door. Then the call cut out. Pacino has replayed that recording dozens of times. Those knocks come exactly at the 17th second every time, he said, like a reminder or a stamp. The police never mentioned that call in the case file. Hackman's phone data was said to be unrecoverable due to a technical error. But the telecom company confirmed to Pacino's attorney that they had never received any recovery request from Santa Fe police. Around the same time, a few neighbors said they saw a black SUV parked near Hackman's house on several evenings, the engine running, the interior lights off. One night, Hackman himself stepped onto the porch and stared at it for minutes. When the car drove away, he went back inside and locked the door 3 times. A week later, he was gone. The oddities lined up like links in a chain. Betsy died a week earlier, but her body seemed maintained as if someone controlled the room temperature. Hackman died cleanly, neatly, without traces. The hard drive vanished. A notebook page torn out, the security system's recorder removed, the back door ajar with loosened hinges, the dog locked away at the exact estimated time Hackman was still alive. And one more detail the public never knew: his study had an antique pendulum clock, a gift from Pacino in 1995. When officers processed the scene, that clock had also stopped at 3:17 a.m. The second hand lay between 2 ticks, as if someone had halted it mid-swing. "Gene never let a clock stop," Pacino said. "If the hand froze at 3:17, it means someone touched it." After the funeral, Pacino went to Santa Fe to see the house himself. He brought a private investigator. The house was cold and clean to a frightening degree. On the desk, there was a faint circular ring, the spot where the glass had rested. Under the light, he saw a few silver hairs near the keyboard. They weren't Gene's. He'd had a haircut a week earlier. On the wall by the window, Pacino noticed what left him speechless: a faint handprint in fine dust about 20 centimeters higher than Gene's reach. "Someone taller than him stood here," he whispered, and waited. The official police report never mentioned that handprint. They concluded the matter had no criminal factor. But the later leaked internal notes, which Pacino held, included a red ink handwritten line, "Unknown textile fibers on victim's clothing source, undetermined." The fiber was a dark gray, resembling those used in electromagnetic shielding gloves, the kind worn by specialized technicians. When asked why he still believed Hackman had been shut down, Pacino answered without hesitation, "Because everything is perfect, and I've never believed in perfection in a death." Then he fell silent for a few seconds, his gaze heavy. Gene's passing had no blood, no noise, no chaos. It felt like a film that's been trimmed, staged, edited, except this time he wasn't allowed to see the ending. Put together from the needle mark, the locked dog, the torn notebook page, to the edited report, nothing felt natural anymore. Gene Hackman's death was no longer a story about old age. It was an erasure campaign carried out so precisely, it felt like Hollywood's own hand directed the final scene of his life. And if that's true, then in Santa Fe that night at 3:17 a.m., it wasn't just a heart that stopped. It was a secret laid to rest in a way the world would never dare to unearth. 4. They didn't just erase him from Hollywood. They erased what remained of him in this world. Pacino said that in May 2025, during his final interview in New York just 6 weeks after Gene Hackman's funeral, he didn't look into the lens, but down at the table where a copy of Variety lay open with the headline, "Gene Hackman Dies Peacefully." Pacino gave a slight laugh, his voice low and hoarse, as if exhausted by the same recycled story. Peacefully. Nothing is peaceful when $80 million vanish with the deceased. 3 days after the estate papers were released, Hackman's family discovered that nearly $80 million in his investment accounts and private equity funds had disappeared without a trace. The money had been spread across 3 major banks in New York and California, but on February 10, 2025, just 3 weeks before his passing, it had all been withdrawn. No hack, no freeze orders. Every transaction was confirmed valid, bearing Gene Hackman's own signature. But what appeared on the new statements truly chilled observers. The entire estate had been assigned to an offshore company in the Bahamas, incorporated on February 17th, exactly 21 days before Hackman was found dead. The company name was PR Holdings Limited. No one knew the legal representative, and there was no real office address. Only a brief file code remained. PR Hackman's 2 sons, Chris and Tim, insisted they had never heard their father mention such a company. There was no new will, no note in his personal accounting files. A bank manager in Santa Fe recalled that a few weeks before Hackman's death, he came to the branch with 2 strangers in black suits and sunglasses. They introduced themselves as international financial advisors. Hackman signed a thick bundle of papers, and before leaving asked one small question, almost as if speaking to himself. "If I don't come back, can they take it all?" The manager thought it was a joke. When the Santa Fe home was unsealed a second time in early April 2025, the list of missing items was so long the police ran out of columns. A collection of European period paintings, more than 20 Patek Philippe watches, and the original script of Scarecrow 1973. The film that brought Hackman and Pacino to Cannes were all gone. No doors were forced, no evidence of theft, no witnesses. Inside, the safe officers found only an old photo of a young Hackman and Pacino standing in the California desert. On the back in blue ink, "Truth costs more than gold." Beside the photo lay a small silver key engraved MZ0419. Forensics showed it was a specialized key from the Swiss firm Berglian Zone, used for premium personal boxes in international vaults. Police kept it as evidence, but when the case records were re-released in June, the key had vanished. The evidence custodian was reassigned out of state a week later. A house caretaker said that right after the police left, a man claiming to be legal representative of the Hackman office arrived to collect the late actor's personal property. He presented a power of attorney document, took a black leather notebook and a small metal box, and disappeared without a trace. 3 days later, the file on him was erased. When Pacino heard this, he spoke softly. "I know what that notebook is. It's the copy of the journal Gene kept for 20 years, the one with the last page torn out." In an exclusive interview with Vanity Fair on May 24, 2025, Pacino admitted he received a parcel postmarked Nassau, Bahamas, where PR Holdings was registered. Inside was an unmarked black USB and a folded note in that familiar handwriting, "No more lies for Bob." When a technician examined it, the drive contained only one file named Scarecrow endscene.move. When opened, the screen stayed black for 3 minutes and 17 seconds, the exact time all the clocks in Hackman's house stopped on the night he died. No sound, no image, just a tiny burst of static at the final second, then darkness. Pacino sat quietly watching, then said, "That isn't empty data. It's Gene's way of saying his story was stopped." When the private team Pacino hired reviewed the bank records, they found the authorization signatures didn't match Hackman's real signature. The strokes were deeper, stiffer, more forceful, like something produced by a pressure device. The banks declined to comment, citing confidentiality. A month later, in a Panama archive listing of new offshore companies in the Bahamas, PR Holdings Limited appeared under Entertainment Restoration Fund, Los Angeles. No one knew what that meant, but an anonymous financial analyst said, "Restoration Fund is an internal code for a film finance wash where questionable capital is cleaned through projects framed as humanitarian cinema." If that's true, Pacino said, then Gene touched the core of what Hollywood never once named. June 2025. A private ceremony was held in New York. Drizzle fell and the city wore a pale gray. No press, no cameras, just a little over 20 relatives and a few old friends. Al Pacino arrived late in a long gray coat carrying a small black leather notebook, identical to the one police had found with its last page torn out. He didn't deliver a eulogy, didn't speak at length. He simply stepped to the casket, placed the notebook on the wooden lid, his hand trembling slightly. "I don't know what secret Gene carried," he said slowly, "but I know someone wanted it buried with him." A friend asked softly, "Do you think this was a crime?" Pacino shook his head, his eyes heavy. "No. This was a silence case. The kind where the doers don't need to hide because everyone has learned to stay quiet for them." He turned to go, pausing once at the door to brush his fingers over a 1973 photograph. "Truth is always more expensive than gold," he whispered. "And sometimes we pay with memory itself." Outside, the rain stopped. Manhattan was left in a mist over the Hudson. From that day, Hollywood media no longer mentioned Gene Hackman's name. Wikipedia pages were quietly edited, and articles about his legacy and assets faded from public archives. At 85, Al Pacino still keeps in his private safe the black USB sent from the Bahamas, something he has never opened again. "I think it's the last piece of Gene," he said, "and I'm afraid if I open it one more time, I'll vanish like he did." No one has known where those $80 million went since. Only one thing seems certain: everything that once belonged to Gene Hackman has been wiped clean as if it never existed. Santa Fe, July 2025. The house where Gene Hackman once lived still sits silent on the hilltop, windows shut, curtains dusty, only the wind sighing through cracked panes. Locals say they sometimes still see a light glow from the second floor, even though the power has been cut. Some call it an illusion. Others believe that some stories cannot be buried. Hollywood called Gene Hackman's passing peaceful. But as each fragment is turned over, that piece looks like a thin coat of paint over an abyss, a vanished hard drive, an evaporated fortune, a Swiss key no one can find, one final line, "No more lies." All of it blends into a warning that sometimes Hollywood's brightest light is lit from the shadows. In his last appearance, Al Pacino said Gene's passing isn't a period. It's proof that in this place, truth doesn't die, the teller does. Then he bowed his head and left the interview, leaving behind a silence longer than fear itself. If you believe this story shouldn't be forgotten, share it, leave a like, and help make Gene Hackman's name heard again as a reminder that sometimes what's most frightening isn't death, but the silence it leaves behind.